Sometimes, keeping your word to one people means breaking it to another. Thaddius Bear Mallister had learned that lesson 6 months ago, when his ranch became neutral ground between the Comanche and white settlers. 6 months of careful peace, fragile as frost, where boundaries were respected. And a man could almost believe he'd figured out how to live right. But peace in Texas never lasts. This particular October morning, Bear was splitting firewood behind his cabin when gunfire echoed from Devil's Canyon, 2 miles north. 3 sharp shots. Silence. Then 2 more. That wasn't hunting. That was trouble. And it was heading his way. He set down his axe, listening. Hoofbeats followed, uneven, desperate, like a horse being pushed past its limits. Bear knew that sound, someone running for their life, losing ground fast. Out of the canyon haze came a paint horse, lathered in sweat. Its rider slumped low over the saddle. Dark hair streamed behind him, Comanche clothing marking him as one of White Bull's people. Even from a distance, Bear saw what was wrong. The rider swayed, blood soaking his shirt. It was Swift Eagle, the 19-year-old son of Running Wolf. Bear had met him twice before, part of peaceful trading parties. Always respectful, curious about farming. Now, he rode like death was chasing him. The paint horse staggered at Bear's fence, then collapsed, sides heaving. Swift Eagle tumbled to the dirt, tried to stand, and crumpled. Wounds in shoulder and thigh bled freely. Bear ran toward him. The boy's hand shot to his belt knife, eyes wild with pain. He muttered rapidly in Comanche. Bear didn't understand the words, but desperation needed no translation. "Easy, son," Bear said, raising his hands. "I'm going to help you." Recognition flickered in Swift Eagle's eyes. In broken English, he rasped, "Soldiers. They come. You must not help." But the sound of cavalry was already closing in, maybe 5 minutes away. Shouting voices, the jingle of tack and spurs. By treaty, Bear's land was neutral ground. Helping Swift Eagle would mean defying the U.S. Army. Handing him over would mean betraying White Bull, and likely sending the boy to his death. Swift Eagle's grip was sudden and fierce. "Sacred law," he whispered. "If you help me live, my father must kill you." Bear's blood went cold. He didn't know this law, but the fear in the boy's eyes told him it was real. Still, there was no time to think. The hoofbeats were pounding now, close enough to count. 10 riders, moving hard. Bear made the choice his conscience demanded, the same choice that had put him in the middle 6 months ago. He lifted Swift Eagle into his arms, blood soaking through both their shirts, and carried him toward the cabin. Behind them, the thunder of cavalry drew closer, kicking up the first dust of what was about to become the most dangerous day of Bear's life. Bear barely got Swift Eagle inside, laying him on the bed, before the yard filled with dust. 10 cavalrymen spread in a practice circle, rifles at their sides but ready. At their head rode a tall man with lieutenant's bars, lean frame, and cold eyes that seemed to enjoy war a little too much. He dismounted, boots crunching on dry earth, and knocked hard enough to rattle the door. "Open up," Lieutenant Marcus Steele, United States Cavalry. Bear wiped blood from his hands. Opened the door. Steele's pale gaze swept over him, weighing lies before they were spoken. "Mallister," he said flatly. "We're chasing a Comanche warrior. Murdered 2 of my men this morning. Witnesses saw him ride this way." Bear folded his arms to hide the stains. "Heard gunshots up by Devil's Canyon. That's all." Steele stepped closer, tobacco on his breath. "He killed those men while they were escorting medicine and food for Comanche children. Supplies meant to save lives. And he stole them." The story slid too neatly into place, like a card trick Bear had seen before. His gut said there was more. "Mind if we look around?" Steele asked, though his tone said he'd do it regardless. "This ranch is neutral ground under treaty with Chief White Bull," Bear reminded him. "My orders come from Colonel Harrison." Steele cut in, his voice sharpening. "And that Comanche killed soldiers bringing aid to his own people's children." Steele signaled his men. They fanned out, starting with the barn, moving toward the cabin. Bear's heart thudded in his throat. He had minutes, maybe less, before they reached the bedroom. One soldier returned carrying a leather pouch, dark stains marking it. Beadwork, but wrong colors, wrong tribe. Bear had seen enough Comanche art to know. "This isn't White Bull's," he said evenly. Steele's hand rested on his revolver. "You calling me a liar?" Before Bear could answer, a crash from the kitchen. A soldier emerged holding a blood-soaked shirt, the one Bear had cut from Swift Eagle's wounds. "Fresh blood, sir. Still wet. And more in the bedroom." Steele's mouth curved into a cold smile. "Looks like your neutrality's a little one-sided. Mallister." The circle of rifles closed in, and beyond the hills, the low, steady beat of war drums began to roll toward them. Steele's voice was sharp. "Search the cabin. Every room, every closet. If you find what I think, we hold a trial right here." Bear's sweat chilled despite the October air. Swift Eagle lay hidden beneath blankets, bleeding but breathing. If they moved the bed, it was over. Sergeant Morrison shifted uneasily. "Sir, maybe we should send word to Colonel Harrison before..." "Before what, Sergeant?" Steele's tone could cut glass. "Before we arrest a man hiding a murderer." But then came the sound that stopped even Steele's words. War drums. Not one rhythm. 3. Bear's eyes narrowed. "That's not just White Bull's people. That's 3 tribes. Lieutenant, you're looking at near 1,000 warriors if they've allied." Steele's jaw tightened. "They won't attack soldiers." "They will," Bear said. "If they think you killed Running Wolf's son." The beats grew louder. Hoofbeats joined in, a low rumble building on the horizon. Steele's composure cracked. "How long?" Bear tilted his head, listening. 5 minutes. Maybe less." Steele turned to his men. "Form a perimeter. Morrison, get the horses ready for a fighting retreat." Bear stepped toward the cabin. "If you want to live through the next hour, you'll listen to me. This war party isn't here to negotiate. They think you killed Swift Eagle. The only way to stop a massacre is to prove them wrong." Steele's glare was ice. "By hiding a murderer? By finding out the truth?" Bear's voice cut through the rising wind. Your story doesn't add up. That pouch, the rush to skip a trial, just 10 men chasing a so-called killer? Steele's jaw worked, but it was Morrison who finally spoke, low but firm. We weren't escorting medicine. Bear's pulse slowed in grim anticipation. Morrison's gaze didn't leave Steele. We were escorting a surveyor. The truth landed like a hammer blow. A government man, mapping reservation boundaries in secret. Swift Eagle catching them marking sacred trees. Shots fired. 2 men dead in the fight. Bear understood instantly. Swift Eagle wasn't running from justice. He was running from a cover-up. The ridge came alive with movement. 30 Comanche warriors crested the rise, Running Wolf at their head, face streaked with black war paint, eyes burning with a father's rage. Bear stepped forward, placing himself between 2 armed lines. "Your son is alive," he called. Hope flared in Running Wolf's face. Behind Bear, Steele hissed, "You just signed our death warrants." Swift Eagle is wounded, but breathing. "He's in my cabin," Bear continued. Running Wolf dismounted, tomahawk in hand. Soldiers say he killed their brothers, stole from children. "They lied," Bear said. The Comanche leader's gaze was unblinking. Steele raised his rifle toward Bear's back, but the cabin door opened. Swift Eagle stood in the frame, pale and bandaged but alive. His voice in Comanche rolled across the yard, telling his father about the sacred trees, the gunfire, and the truth. Running Wolf's expression shifted from fury to something colder, sharper. The kind of look that measured not just an enemy, but the weight of justice itself. Bear caught enough to know the heart of it. Swift Eagle had fought to protect sacred ground, not to murder. The soldier's story was a cover. The soldiers lied. Running Wolf repeated in English for all to hear. Steele snapped. "I won't stand here listening to this savage sympathizer," raising his rifle again. Before he could fire, the tomahawk left Running Wolf's hand, a blur of steel that halted inches from Steele's throat. "This is neutral ground," Bear said, voice hard. "By your own law, no blood can be spilled here without White Bull's consent. Break that, and you dishonor your tribe." Running Wolf froze, torn between rage and duty. Swift Eagle spoke again, his tone weak but unyielding. He told how Bear had saved him, knowing it might cost his life. The shift was subtle but decisive. The old law, which demanded Bear's death for aiding a Comanche facing punishment, now protected him instead. Around them, rifles and bows lowered slightly, but the air still crackled with the weight of decisions yet to be made. Steele had no choice. Running Wolf declared trial by combat. One Comanche warrior against the man who had tried to kill his son. Bear stood aside, feeling the weight of what this meant. This was not just Steele's judgment. It was truth cutting through lies, for all to witness. The circle formed. Warriors on one side, soldiers on the other. No rifles, only the chosen weapons. Steele's wound slowed him. He swung in desperation, each move wild and unfocused. The Comanche champion moved like shadow, evading, striking with precision. In less than 3 minutes, Steele was on his knees, then face down in the dirt of Bear's yard. Justice was swift, but Bear knew this fight was only a spark in a much larger fire. Morrison gathered his remaining men. We'll ride back to the fort. Tell Colonel Harrison everything. Full report on the surveying operation." Bear stepped forward. "Tell him the Comanche have proof of treaty violations, and they will not stay quiet." Morrison nodded grimly. "I'll tell him, but I can't promise he'll listen." When the soldiers rode out, Bear found himself surrounded by warriors who had come ready for war, now asking for his help to prevent it. Running Wolf approached. "You chose truth over safety, justice over profit. Now, you must do more." Bear looked toward Swift Eagle, alive because of a choice made in seconds. "What do you need me to do?" Bear asked. "You must ride to the territorial capital." Running Wolf said, "Tell the governor what you saw. Carry proof he cannot ignore." A leather pouch was brought forward, the same one Steele had claimed held a dead soldier's belongings. When opened, surveyor's markers spilled into Bear's hands, each tag a wound cut into sacred land. Bear left at first light. The sky was pale, streaked with the last chill of night, and the weight of the leather pouch felt heavier than his saddle. He had ridden long distances before, but never with this much at stake. Each surveyor's marker inside the pouch was a fragment of broken trust between the Comanche and the white government. The plains stretched endless, but Bear kept his mind sharp. A rider who drifted into thought too long could miss the shimmer of sunlight on a rifle barrel. By midday, he spotted dust behind him, too far to see faces, close enough to know they were following. He did not slow, did not turn. A man on a mission could not afford to look like prey. By the second night, Bear made camp near a dry creek bed. He kept the fire low and his rifle close. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse snorted. A twig cracked. He stayed still, every muscle wired tight. Then, the sound faded, replaced by the endless whisper of grass in the wind. In the morning, tracks led away, 2 riders, heavy horses, heading west. If they had meant to kill him, they would have tried last night, which meant they were waiting for him to lead them somewhere. He saddled up, the pouch of markers pressing against his ribs. The capital was still 3 days away, and Bear knew, without doubt, that the real fight would not be on the open plains. It would be in a room full of men who saw treaties as nothing more than paper. The capital smelled of coal smoke and horse dung, with an undertone of something colder, ambition. Bear's boots clicked against the marble floor as he stepped into the government building. His buckskin jacket looked out of place against polished suits and gold watch chains. Men in tailored coats eyed him like he had tracked mud under their fine carpet. A clerk took the pouch from his hands, weighed it without opening it, and disappeared behind tall double doors. When they called him in, the council room was already thick with cigar smoke. Faces turned toward him, some curious, some hostile, most indifferent. He laid the pouch on the long table. The thud echoed louder than it should have. "These are your markers," Bear said. "Proof of every broken promise you made to my people." No one moved. Then, a man at the head of the table leaned back and smiled without warmth. "Mr. Bear, treaties change, land changes, the world moves forward." Bear's jaw tightened. "Forward for you, backwards for everyone else." The head councilman opened the pouch, spilling the metal markers across the table. They rang against the polished wood, sharp, cold. "Do you know what these are worth?" Mr. Bear? He asked. Bear met his gaze. Not as much as your word. Laughter rippled around the table, low and condescending. The markers were gathered back into the pouch, tied shut, and slid toward another man without so much as a glance at Bear. The message was clear. They were tokens, not truth. Bear stood there a moment longer, every instinct telling him this fight was already lost. But deep inside, another thought took root. If justice couldn't be won here, it would have to be taken elsewhere. When he stepped back into the street, the sky was the color of steel. The city felt like a mouth closing around him. Somewhere in the crowd, a pair of eyes followed his every move. Bear felt the eyes on him before he saw the shadow. He slipped into an alley, boots splashing through a puddle black with soot. The narrow street spat him out onto a quieter road where a wagon waited. Driver hunched low. The man at the reins didn't speak, just tilted his head. Bear climbed aboard, keeping one hand near the rifle wrapped in a blanket. They rolled toward the city gates in silence. The air tasted of iron, thick with the storm coming in. Bear glanced over his shoulder more than once. The streets behind them stayed empty, but the feeling didn't leave. At the last checkpoint, two uniformed men waved them down. One leaned into the wagon, eyes lingering on the pouch at Bear's side. Heading far? The soldier asked. Bear met his gaze. Home. The soldier's eyes narrowed, but he stepped back. Safe travels. The wagon rattled on, hooves striking sparks from the cobblestones. They were halfway across the open plain when the first rider appeared on the ridge. Then another. The driver cursed, snapping the reins. The wagon lurched forward. Bear pulled the rifle free, the weight familiar in his hands. The riders closed in, dust boiling up behind them. A shot cracked, splintering wood inches from Bear's shoulder. He fired back, one clean motion, sending a shadow tumbling from its saddle. But there were more. Too many. The driver shouted over the thunder of hooves. "We can't outrun them!" Bear's eyes went to the horizon. In the far distance, he could see the faint outline of the hills that marked home. "Keep going," he said. "Don't stop for me." Before the driver could argue, Bear leapt from the wagon, rolling hard, the rifle already swinging up. His shots came measured, each one buying the wagon another second, another breath closer to safety. When the last bullet was spent, Bear stood in the settling dust, the riders circling at a cautious distance. The wagon was a shrinking dot on the horizon. He smiled once, tired, but sure, before melting into the grass. Like a shadow the land had decided to keep.